Welcome to the How Did They Do It Real Estate podcast. Have you ever wondered how people succeed in real estate and what steps they took to get there? If so, this podcast is for you. Your hosts, Sayla and Eileen Prack, interview top experts in the real estate community to share with you their real estate journey and how they achieved massive success. Our goal is to provide you with valuable real estate resources and to help you apply it to your own real estate goal.
Thank you everyone for joining today's episode of the How Did They Do It Real Estate podcast. I am your host, Sayla Prack. Today, we have our special guest, Jacob Vanderslice. Jacob is a co-founder of VanWest Partners and has been investing in real estate full-time since 2005. Prior to his real estate career, Jacob was a professional firefighter and arson investigator. Outside of work, he enjoys flying airplanes, skiing, golf, hiking, and spending time with his wife and young sons. So welcome to the show, Jacob.
Sayla, good to meet you. Thanks for having us on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for spending time with me today. For me, I'm very excited about this interview because we'll be talking about self-storage asset class, which is one of the topics that I wanted to learn more. So really appreciate you coming on and share your knowledge with us.
You're welcome. Look forward to it.
So Jacob, can you please share a little bit more about your background and how did you get started with real estate?
Yeah, I kind of fell into it back in about 2005. My job at the time, I had a lot of time off and was only working about 10 days a month. So I started doing a handful of rentals here and there with a buddy of mine. We'd fix them up on our days off and find tenants ourselves and kind of kept going. And I got busy doing real estate and I quit my full-time job and I've been unemployed in real estate ever since, 2006, so to speak. We initially did a lot of single family fix and flips all over the country, mainly in the Colorado Front Range, but we were in the Southwest, the Southeast, did a bunch of deals in Kansas City, Detroit, Central Valley of California, kind of all over the place. And did that for many years. Mm-hmm. And about 13 and 14, we got into commercial real estate and we started doing adaptive reuse retail projects, which is basically buying interesting, tired, old buildings and converting them into multi-tenant experience-based retail concepts. And then we got in the self-storage space in 2015, and we had looked at the asset class for a while. We liked its historic downside protection, its durable recurring revenue streams, its scalability. We think it's kind of a good blend of a strategy that protects principal, but also a strategy that has a reasonable and quantifiable upside scenario as well. So we did our first project in Denver that we bought in 2015, and it was a ground up development project. So we kind of jumped in head first, so to speak. Did a number of other development projects here in Denver. We went into Milwaukee in 2016, and these deals were all done and funded in the context of single asset syndications. And we launched our first storage fund in 19, and then we did our second storage fund in 21, and we're currently on our third storage fund. It's been a good business, and over time, it's evolved to being our primary line of business and primary investment strategy.
So, do you believe that self-storage would be a really good hedge against the recession, especially with the current economy right now?
Yeah, when we first got into it, we knew that was the case kind of from just studying the history of the asset class. But we learned it, obviously, when you get into a new asset class or a new strategy, you don't know that much about it in your first deal. You know enough to be dangerous. But as you do more and you begin to operate your portfolio and scale, you start to realize kind of how it performs better. And I think what drove the idea home that it performs well during downturns is the pandemic. I know a lot of real estate asset classes did pretty well, but storage did exceptionally well. And typically when there's a economic disruption, storage demand increases. People are either losing jobs, getting new jobs, upsizing and downsizing their homes, getting married, getting divorced, whatever the case might be. When there's life changes, those life changes are demand drivers in self-storage. And when there's a softening or a downturn, life changes tend to increase.
So I just want to take a step back. So for self-storage, I know a lot of our listeners, they know about multifamily, single families. They understand that there's tenants that living into the unit itself. But for self-storage, what type of things are being stored in the self-storage? And basically, what is a self-storage anyway?
Yeah, we'll compare the two asset classes for a moment. We love multifamily and affordably priced workforce housing in the residential side. We love that strategy. It's defensible. It's downside protected. I think as the nation kind of shifts more from a nation of homeowners to a nation of renters, I think that attainably priced housing concept is going to be out there for a long time and a defensible strategy. The big differences between self-storage and multifamily really, one big one are the operating expenses. So it's much more cost effective to run a storage facility than it is a 200 unit apartment building. You've got one bathroom versus 200. You don't have kitchens. The second reason it's a little bit easier is I'm going to sound like a terrible capitalist here, but there's no fair housing laws. So if somebody doesn't pay, you're not going through the courts to do an eviction. It's a simple administrative process. You put out a notice, and if they don't pay when enough time goes by, you auction the contents and you put a paying customer in. But at its core, self-storage is really, it's a business that allows people to find an extra place to put their belongings they can't fit in their house. So we have a lot of customers that are business owners, for example, like beverage vendors, people who stock vending machines with beverages. They don't want to pay for some small warehouse to keep their stuff, so they just rent a unit they can drive up to. They come and go every day, stock up their beverage truck, go do their route, and they come back. We have a lot of folks who live in smaller apartment units, 1 or 2 bedroom apartment units. They've got family heirloom furniture. They've got seasonal gear like mountain bikes, skis, golf clubs. They put their skis in there in the summertime and they put their golf clubs in there in the wintertime. So our customer base is pretty diverse. It's kind of all walks of life and all different types of people. But at its core, it's a place for them to keep their extra stuff.
So as an investors in real estate, usually we're trying to say location. And we're always trying to pick the state that actually more of a landlord friendly state. So it doesn't seem like this apply to self-storage. So basically you can actually own a self-storage at any state throughout the United States, correct? Or is there
There's some states we're not targeting acquisitions in just for, the growth climate, the political environment for various reasons. But generally, self-storage is very local supply sensitive. So you're not as worried about the regulatory environment from a housing perspective because that's not really going to apply to you. You're mainly looking at the supply ratio in the submarket, how many square feet per capita of storage are in the 1, 3, and 5 mile trade radius. It's very local supply sensitive. But beyond that, you're looking at just normal real estate fundamentals, good location, good demographics, good incomes, good housing density. So if we find a deal in a market we're not already operating in, we'll look at that deal and we'll potentially buy it if it makes sense. And we'll buy more in the area to kind of get that concentration and be able to amortize some of our fixed costs. But yeah, we're not saying we're not going to buy in Illinois because it's really tough to do an eviction in Illinois because it doesn't apply to self-storage.
That makes sense. And some of those key factors that you're looking into the location of a storage itself, you said that the density per capacity, and also is there anything else that you're looking into, like a rule of thumbs that you're looking into, for example, like 20 people or within a mile radius or something like that you can actually enlighten us?
Yeah, we don't want to buy deals in locations that are overly rural. If you're buying a deal in the middle of, let's say, a small town in the middle of Kansas, by the book, it might make sense. There might be a really low supply ratio, low square feet per capita. But if the town has 10,000 people and some other facility gets built, obviously your supply ratios are going to go way out of whack because the population center is so small. Your buyer pool, when it comes time to sell it, whenever that may be, it's going to be much more limited because there's a lot more storage operators who want to buy a deal in a major MSA as opposed to a small town in rural farmland. So we typically avoid deals that are overly rurally located. But beyond that, we like population centers that are 50,000 plus in the 5 plus mile trade radius. Stories for growth, stories for good demographics, wage growth. People are moving there for job creation. We shy away from environments that don't have a good economic story.
That makes sense. And then, so in terms of the storage itself, you mentioned earlier that you started out in 2015 and you go straight in with a new development. Why did you decide to start with a new developments instead of buying an existing ones and do a value add and improve that self-storage instead?
We found a parcel of land that was zoned for self-storage in downtown Denver. And we have raised a lot of equity over the years leading up to this and done a lot of deals, over 1,000 single family homes, apartment buildings, retail. But we had not done storage before. And one of the groups we took it to said, okay, we'll do this with you guys, but we want to do it on a programmatic basis. And we want to do some development. We want to do some value add. So that just happened to be our first deal. And our first deal happened to be a development project. So we, that in addition to 7 other properties in that specific portfolio, we built up over a few years and we sold that to Extra Space, one of the larger REITs in the country, in May.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, we just kind of fell into it with that project and kept going. It wasn't really a direct pivot saying we're gonna be a self-storage owner operator as a primary line of business. It was kind of just, let's do a deal, see how it goes. And okay, we do another one. And like most businesses evolve, it just kind of grows over time. And here we are.
So you have to make a recommendation to someone who actually wanted to start with a self-storage asset. Would you recommend that person to start with an existing one, or like starting a build new one?
Well, there's really three ways to get exposure to the self-storage industry. One is to buy a stock in a REIT. One of the disadvantages of buying a stock in a REIT is that stock is generally at the mercy of the broader market. So even though that REIT might be seeing good revenue growth and good NOI growth, it still could be down 25% this year. Another disadvantage are the fees that REITs charge at the entity level. And then beyond that, you're also not participating in the tax advantages like depreciation, accelerated depreciation that you would by either direct ownership or investing in a fund. The second way you can participate in storage is to invest in a private real estate vehicle like a syndication or a fund. You and I both do those in multifamily and self-storage. And the third way is to go out and buy your own deal. And if you're going to get into the business and do it yourself for the first time, I certainly would not recommend doing a development project on your first deal. It's higher risk. It's a longer path to revenue. There's a lot of bad things that can happen, as you know, in development versus buying an existing facility. One of the many advantages of buying an existing asset is you're buying an existing income stream that's quantifiable. So you know what the income has been for some number of years. And you also, I would assume if you're buying the deal, there's probably a good story to grow that income over time with more effective management. There's a lot to consider, though. You've got to have a fair amount of cash or partners with cash to go out and do one. I mean, there's some very low price storage deals out there that are maybe $500,000, but they're also small and they're also probably in very rural locations without a lot of buyers. So you got to have some cash to do it. And then if you do end up buying your own storage facility, one thing you really have to understand is how you're going to operate it. So are you going to self-manage it, or are you going to find a third-party management company to run it for you? There's plenty of third-party management companies out there. Some are better than others, but one of the big disadvantages of third-party management is the expense loads are typically pretty high. And inherently, as I'm sure you'll agree, a third party just never cares about your deal as much as an owner does. Right. So if you go down this path, I would encourage you to self-manage it, and you would learn a lot about the business doing that. But it's also going to take you a lot of time and a lot of effort. You have to set up the software systems. You got to find the employees to run it. Expect to be on the phone a bunch, but that's how you learn how to run a given investment strategy, by owning and operating an asset.
So what type of self-storage classes available out there? So I know in multifamily, we have A class, C, B class, and C's. And is it the same thing with the self-storage as well? Yeah, similar classes, and kind of the line between those classes is kind of subjective based on who you ask, because I'm sure it is in multifamily too. In my opinion, though, like a Class A storage facility would be newer construction, multi-story, climate controlled, in a denser, more infill environment that's very difficult to replicate. So we're also doing development outside of our fund strategy. And when we build a new facility, it takes a year to get it entitled. It takes a year to build it, then it takes another couple of years to stabilize it. So those things are tough to do. It takes a lot of money and takes some risk too. So the Class A facilities that trade for very low cap rates are generally in locations that are difficult to replicate as far as competition goes. Class B facility might be an example of that might be newer construction, but it's single story, maybe a mix of climate and non-climate controlled, more suburban location. And then Class C down, I would just say those are in more tertiary markets, older building construction, generally non-climate controlled. So kind of the traditional self-storage facility that you picture in your head when you think about the asset class. Just you show up through a gate, there's rows of steel buildings with doors. And then going down from there, you've got your D's and F's that are just rougher, older. Maybe the drive aisles are not paved; they're dirt. We've bought some deals that are definitely Class D, if not maybe F plus. But our pricing we paid on those is reflective of the condition of the asset, and we improved them quite a bit with capital improvements, but obviously mainly from management efficiencies. So from similar classes to multifamily. So from the operating standpoint, do you have any recommendation of what type of operation or value add component that you can actually put into the self-storage facilities in order to increase the NOI? some of the things that we can do?
Yeah. So if we use only the example of buying an existing facility, because development's totally different, you're building and your cap rate when you complete the facility is negative, right? You have no income and you've got expenses. But on an acquisition, there's really two types of deals we'll target. We'll target deals that have very low physical occupancy, and our primary objective in the first year or two to grow revenue is physical occupancy growth, meaning just leasing up more units, growing occupancy over time. And we'll also buy deals that have high physical occupancy, maybe 90 or 92%, but the rates are excessively below market. So our NOI growth strategy really comes from two different directions. One is physical occupancy growth, and one is existing rent increases. So if there's a customer that's been there for 10 years, paying $80 a month, and all the 10 by 10s are in town are at $120 a month. That's an easy story to increase their rate and probably not get a move out after that rate increase. There's also, kind of like multifamily, there's a lot of ancillary revenue streams in self-storage. In our portfolio, between tenant insurance, late fees, administrative fees, and merchandise sales, those ancillary revenue streams make up about 9.3% of our top line revenue. So you can pull just a few small levers, like adding tenant insurance in, enforcing late fees, having a one-time convenience fee when you move in, a phone payment fee. Without even raising rents, you can grow your revenue by 9% in the first year of operation. So physical occupancy growth, ancillary revenue, and marking below market customers up to market rates are three ways that we grow NOI. And then on the cost side, on the bottom line, we control our expense loads as best we can. So we'll rebid vendor contracts for landscaping and snow removal. We have some national vendors that treat us pretty well. And between saving on the operating expense side and growing the revenue side, we typically see some pretty attractive net operating income increases in the first few years.
So in terms of the expense ratios, what do you, comparing to the revenue, what do you see? What is an average expense ratio for running a self-storage facility?
Yeah, like anything, it varies based on the facility type, but it really is driven by property taxes. That's a big component. So if you're lumping in operating expenses between controllable and uncontrollable, your expense ratio on a deal in Illinois, for example, might be somewhere in the low 40s. A deal in the Carolinas or somewhere with a lower tax environment, your OPEX ratio might be in the mid 30s. So it kind of depends on the deal, but I would say 35% would be on the lower end and 45 would be towards the higher end on a stabilized basis. I mean, if you're buying a deal with very low occupancy and a high property tax environment, your year one expense ratio is going to be probably north of 50, right? But that's kind of by design. But stabilized, yeah, mid 30s to low 40s approximately.
Awesome. And then so I noted that some of the self-storage deals, sometimes I receive it from other syndicators. They mention about the business plans in terms of adding like an RV parking, adding like a boat parking or something like that. Do we need any permit or anything like that in order to add all those revenue stream?
Well, it's going to depend on the municipality that you're operating in, but on many of our deals across our various funds and syndications, we've added boat and RV parking after acquisition. It's a really easy way to grow revenue because the costs to do that are pretty nominal. So we had some excess land on a deal in North Carolina in Salisbury, and we put gravel down and we striped a bunch of boat and RV spaces, and it cost us probably, I don't know, it was just under $100,000, and we added about 30K per year in top line revenue from that parking. So you could say that you're making a 25% return annually on your investment. So it makes a lot of sense to do that. We'll also buy deals that already have a boat and RV component. The markets that are in the Sun Belt with lots of HOAs in the residential neighborhoods near the facility, those typically have a high demand for boat and RV because a lot of people have boats and RVs, but they can't park them on their driveway because the HOA won't allow them to. Right. So we have one deal in Tucson, Arizona, for example, and about 50% of our unit count is boat and RV parking, and the other half is self-storage units. So we do plenty of that. It's a great way to augment your revenue. We don't have any deals that are primarily boat and RV parking. There's plenty of those out there. It's a whole strategy, covered boat and RV with power, waste stations for dumping your septic tank out. We don't have any of that, but just kind of basic parking spots.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that. And so there's some self-storage that are actually coming in with a wood frame self-storage, and the other one's like a brick self-storage, what is your recommendation?
Definitely steel and brick. Yeah.
Steel and brick.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you've got wood frame demising walls between your units, bad things can happen. People tend to, if you get a bad character in there, people tend to burrow. Sometimes they'll make a hole in another unit and take their stuff out. But yeah, steel partition walls and steel structural systems are definitely the way to go when you're building new product.
So I know as a passive investors, if they're looking at a self-storage deal or looking at a fund, any recommendations or any things that to look out for, especially if you're looking at the underwriting on the deal itself, that they can look out for and knowing that this is a good deal or not a good deal?
Yeah, and this will kind of transcend, storage and other asset classes. But if you're out there with some cash and you're looking to invest some of your cash in a private syndication or fund vehicle, there's a few things you want to watch for among many. One of them is understanding the assumptions the sponsor is making that are driving the return profile. So, as I'm sure you'll agree, you can make the spreadsheet tell you whatever you want it to, right? If it's not a deal, you just lower the exit cap rate, you raise the revenue growth and put a refi in there, and suddenly it's a deal. The IRR makes sense. So you don't have to be a real estate finance expert to do these things, but just understanding what assumptions that sponsor is making to drive the IRR and drive the multiple. And also understanding, are the assumptions that are being made, especially in this environment, are those assumptions reasonable and achievable? Or are they, on the best possible day, this deal is going to make a 15% IRR, right? And as you kind of analyze different return profiles and different risk profiles, I would encourage you to, let's say you look at a deal with a 20% IRR and a deal with a 15% IRR. Well, human nature would gravitate towards the 20, but the 15% IRR might be a lot more achievable and real and reasonable. And understanding what IRR means is important too. We won't go too far into the weeds on this, but IRR stands for those of us who don't know, it stands for internal rate of return, and it's basically a time-weighted calculation based on a series of cash flows. So IRR accounts for time, but IRR can be distorted if a sponsor is raising capital and then giving that capital back to the investor with a tiny bit of profit, but doing it very quickly. So you might have a situation where you have a very high IRR, but if it's a quick sale, you might have a low multiple. So I always encourage people to look at the blend between that IRR or annualized return target and the multiple on invested capital. And by multiple, I mean, how much profit can you expect to realize as a percentage of your original invested capital? So if you put 100 in and get 200 back, that's a 2 multiple. Put 100 in and get 250 back, that's 2.5, and kind of rinse and repeat. So is that multiple realized over a reasonable period? So I think if someone would expect to get a 2 multiple over 5 years, they'd be happy. If they get a 2 multiple over 6 years, they would probably also be happy. But the IRR in that 6-year scenario is materially lower than in the 5-year scenario. So we personally don't love IRR as a metric that describes a return profile of a deal because it's misunderstood. It can be distorted. We quantify IRR and we speak to it in our underwriting, but two things that matter a lot more to me, at least personally, is cash flow and multiple. Those two things are very real. IRR can kind of be hocus pocus sometimes, but cash flow and multiple are very real.
So in terms of you talking about reasonable exit timeframe, right? So if someone wanted to invest in the syndication, private syndication for a self-storage deal, what is the timeframe that they expect? And I know all this is all projected numbers, and what is the cash flows and also equity multiple that they should expect?
Well, it's a changing environment, and I think investor return expectations need to change with that environment. It depends on the type of deal, but in the case of our portfolio, we do single asset development syndications, and then every existing facility acquisition goes into our fund strategy. So in our syndications on the development side, we target a 5-year hold, and that equates to be 18 to 20% IRR and about a 2.25 multiple over that 5-year hold. But the big thing to understand on a development project is almost all of your return is going to come on some kind of reversion event. There's going to be very little cash flow during the hold period. If you hold it for longer and you refinance it, there could be a big cash flow component. But if you hold it for 5 years, and it takes you a year to build it and 2 to 3 years to stabilize and grow NOI, you're going to see a very low ratio of that total multiple come in the form of cash flow, and most of that come in the form on some kind of gain on sale or reversion event. In the case of our fund, just for example, we target a 7-year hold from the date of each one of our acquisitions, and that's a similar multiple to our development strategy, but the IRR is a bit lower because of that hold period. And in terms of where that multiple comes from, we expect about half of it to come along the way from distributions from operational cash flow, and the balance of that total multiple to come on some kind of reversion event. So your question about expectations in general, it just kind of depends on the vehicle you're investing in. Like I said, development by design is very light on cash flow and very heavy on the reversion event, and buying existing acquisitions is kind of a nicer blend between the two.
Thank you. And I want to talk about my next question is about self-storage financing. I know now the interest rates going up, and from a multi-family standpoint, that has been a challenging things to get a deal closed with the financing. How's the self-storage deals? Are they how the finance process look like, and is it easier or is it harder? And what can we look out for in order to have a successful closing self-storage deal?
Well, let me begin by saying that multifamily financing in the United States is the best debt on the planet. There is no better debt out there with no better terms as far as rate, amortization, term. It's just the best debt available. So storage debt is not as attractive as multifamily debt. But what we're seeing in the capital market space right now, we're recording this at towards the end of 2022. It could not be more different than it was a year ago, obviously. And the most apparent change, as we all know, is interest rates have increased. So last year, we bought about $100 million worth of deals, and our blended interest rate on those deals was sub 4. I think it's like 3.85, somewhere in there. This year and lately, we've been financing deals between 5.9 to 6.5. Kind of depending on the bank and when we actually bought the deal. So rates have gone up a lot, and that's definitely an issue if you're focused on cash flow, but we're not buying as many deals because we're just not seeing as much that makes sense, just like you. The other big delta from last year in the storage space that we're seeing is the loan term. So we were getting 10-year fixed financing pretty consistently in 2021 and early 2022. And the latter part of this year, lenders have pulled way back on term. We're generally seeing, on a good day, we're seeing 5 to 7 year maturities. 10-year maturities just really don't exist right now. Nobody wants to have a fixed rate that far out in this rising rate environment. And beyond interest rates and loan terms, the other big change that we're seeing are proceeds. So if there was a lender that was lending at 70% a year ago pretty consistently, now they're between 60 and 65 on total project cost. So you've got a lot of considerations there on the debt side. It's very dynamic. We've definitely returned to leveraging our more regional lender relationships versus our national lender relationships. We did most of our deals last year were done with 2 very large national lenders, and our deals this year, we've done 8 acquisitions so far. Not so far, but that's what we'll do because we've got 2 weeks left in the year. But out of our 8 deals, only one of those was with a kind of larger national player. Everything else was smaller regional banks. So the environment's changed for lots of reasons in a big way from a year ago. So
in terms of the underwriting itself, have you make any changes to your underwriting and making sure that it's more conservative or preparing yourself?
Yeah, we only buy deals that we love, as I'm sure you do, and really anybody else in real estate. We're extremely conservative, regardless of the market environment. We don't like to stretch on our assumptions. This year, we have looked at 800 deals. We have financially modeled 200. Full financial model, Excel spreadsheet, committee meetings, and we've actually closed on 8. So that represents about 1% of the deals that we look at. So very small ratio. When it comes to our pipeline, we actually buy. Really, our underwriting assumptions that have fundamentally changed are our price per foot we're going to pay. That's going down quite a bit. We are increasing our cap rate assumptions when it comes time to sell, just to reflect the rising rate environment. And we're also coming in a little more heavy-handed on the offers that we make as it relates to their pricing guidance, because we know there's some pain out there. And if we're going to take risk right now, buying a deal, that risk needs to be excessively mitigated compared to that risk that we might have taken a few years ago in a cheaper rate environment.
Awesome. So Jacob, my final question is, if we wanted to get into self-storage deal, how do we find good deals?
Yeah. Well, deal flow in storage is as challenging as it is in multifamily or single family or any other asset class. You would think that everything's going to go on sale right now, but it's not. We're seeing some pricing reductions, and we're seeing some pricing that's quite a bit less than it would have been a year ago, but it's not systemic. It's not across the entire industry. We source deals in two ways. One is we do a fair amount of direct to seller marketing with like a business letter. We say, hey, we're not brokers. We want to take a look at your deal. Give us a call. That's been moderately successful, but most of our deals we sourced in the last few years have been from broker relationships. I use this term very carefully because it gets thrown around a lot, but most of our deals have been off market. I mean, we've been the only group that's seen them, not off market like everybody's seen it. We're the last ones to look at it and we buy it. But there's quite a few brokers out there who will do a deal with you and you perform, and they'll bring you one and say, hey, my seller wants 10 million. You guys are the first one I'm taking this to. Can you make it work? We'll say, well, send us the financials. We'll give you an LOI. And if we can meet their pricing, we go under contract and we buy it. On the deals that we look at that are widely marketed by a national brokerage outfit, we can rarely compete. We are, even in this environment with rising rates, if we offer on something that the entire world sees, we are just blown out of the water from a pricing perspective. So if you want to go out and find deals, it's a tough thing to kind of get into, but start networking with brokers. And when I say brokers, not residential realtors or brokers that specialize in retail leasing, but self-storage brokers. They've got deals that can kind of help guide you through the process. But the market remains, despite the uncertainty and the rising interest rates, the market remains very competitive.
Awesome. So Jacob, is there anything else that I haven't asked that you feel that our listeners should know about self-storage asset class?
Not specifically on self-storage, but not that I'm in a position to give advice. But if I were to give advice, if you've been considering investing in real estate for a long time and you've got some cash and you just never pulled the trigger, I'll tell you, it's never a good time to buy, and it's never a bad time to buy. I think the worst thing you can do is sit on the sidelines and not take action. So if you're thinking about buying a rental, buying a storage facility, investing in a private fund or syndication, the greatest asset you have is time. And there's no perfect deal. And frankly, the home runs that we've had over the years were unexpected. We never thought they would go as well as they did. And any home runs you see out there probably aren't real. Just look at deals that you can create downside protection on and have reasonable and quantifiable and achievable upside. But investing takes time, and if you're not in the game, you're losing out.
So Jacob, how has real estate investing impacted your life? I know you invested in real estate since 2005. So how that has impacted your life so far?
Well, it's been a whirlwind, right? There's never any rest for the weary in this business. We've got a $250 million plus asset base. We've got 75 employees. So we got a lot going on. But it's been a hugely positive impact. The relationships I've developed, the things I've learned, a lot of this stuff you can't learn in a book or on a podcast or in a class. You have to actually go out and do deals. And frankly, we've learned by failing and remembering those failures and applying the lessons from those failures to future deals. So it's been an enormously positive impact. It's allowed me to create time, create wealth. I'm still far behind on both of those, trying to get more of both, but I'm sure you are too. But yeah, it's been a great experience, and I'm kind of unemployable anyway, so I'm not sure what else I would do.
So Jacob, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today and answering all my questions for passive and also being an operator for self-storage itself and what to look out for if you wanted to get into the business itself. So if our listener wants to find out more about you, about your company, or wanted to invest with you, where can they go?
Well, we always love to talk about real estate with folks. They can email me, jacob@vanwestpartners.com. They can go to our website, vanwestpartners.com, or they can hit me on LinkedIn, Jacob Vanderslice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jacob.
Tyler, I enjoyed it. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
And thank you for listening to our podcast today, brought to you by VanWest Capital. We would really appreciate it if you can go to iTunes right now and leave a rating and written review. Also, please don't forget to subscribe so you can always get the latest episodes. You can also connect with us on Facebook, How Did They Do It Real Estate. We'd love to hear your feedback and any topics that you're interested in for future episodes. Lastly, to learn more about us, you can go to vanwestcapital.com and fill out the Contact Us page so you can speak to us directly. Nothing on the show should be considered as specific personal advice. Please consult your legal, tax, and real estate professionals for individualized advice.